left him alone. But I am not so sure now that he was mad, and I can think of many people much madder than Man ever was. He didn't look mad. He was a man of medium height, thin, and he wasn't bad looking, either. He never stared at you the way I expected a mad man to do, and when you spoke to him you were sure of getting a very reasonable reply. But he did have some curious habits. He went up for every election, city council or legislative council, and then he stuck posters everywhere in the district. These posters were well printed. They just had the word vote and below that, Man's picture. At every election he got exactly 3 votes. That I couldn't understand. Man voted for himself, but who were the other 2? I asked Hat. Hat said, I really can't say, boy. Is a real mystery. Perhaps is 2 jokers. But they is funny sort of jokers if they do the same thing so many times. They must be mad just like he. And for a long time the thought of these 2 madmen who voted for Man haunted me. Every time I saw someone doing anything just a little bit odd, I wondered, is he who vote for Man? At large in the city were these 2 men of mystery. Man never worked. But he was never idle. He was hypnotized by the word, particularly the written word, and he would spend a whole day writing a single word. One day I met Man at the corner of Miguel Street. Boy, where you going? Man asked. I going to school, I said. And Man, looking at me solemnly, said in a mocking way, so you goes to school, eh? I said automatically, yes, I goes to school. And I found that without intending it I had imitated Man's correct and very English accent. That again was another mystery about Man. His accent. If you shut your eyes while he spoke, you would believe an Englishman, a good class Englishman who wasn't particular about grammar, was talking to you. Man said, as though speaking to himself, so the little man is going to school. Then he forgot me, and took out a long stick of chalk from his pocket, and began writing on the pavement. He drew a very big S in outline and then filled it in, and then the C and the H and the O. But then he started making several O's, each smaller than the last, until he was writing in cursive, O after flowing O. When I came home for lunch, he had got to French Street, and he was still writing O's, rubbing off mistakes with a rag. In the afternoon he had gone round the block and was practically back in Miguel Street. I went home, changed from my school clothes into my home clothes, and went out to the street. He was now halfway up Miguel Street. He said, so the little man gone to school today? I said, yes. He stood up and straightened his back, then he squatted again and drew the outline of a massive L and filled that in slowly and lovingly. When it was finished, he stood up and said, you finish your work. I finish mine. Or it was like this. If you told Man you were going to the cricket, he would write crick and then concentrate on the ES until he saw you again. One day Man went to the big cafe at the top of Miguel Street and began barking and growling at the customers on the stools as though he were a dog. The owner, a big Portuguese man with hairy hands, said, Man, get out of this shop before I tangle with you. Man just laughed. They threw Man out. Next day, the owner found that someone had entered his cafe during the night and had left all the doors open. But nothing was missing. Hat said, one thing you must never do is trouble Man. He remember everything. That night the cafe was entered again and the doors again left open. The following night the cafe was entered and this time little blobs of excrement were left on the center of every stool and on top of every table, and at regular intervals along the counter. The owner of the cafe was the laughingstock of the street for several weeks, and it was only after a long time that people began going to the cafe again. Hat said, "Is just like I say. Boy, I don't like meddling with that man. These people really bad mind, you know. God make them that way." It was things like this that made people leave man alone. The only friend he had was a little mongrel dog, white with black spots on the ears. The dog was like man in a way, too. It was a curious dog. It never barked, never looked at you, and if you looked at it, it looked away. It never made friends with any other dog, and if some dog tried either to get friendly or aggressive, man's dog gave it a brief look of disdain and ambled away, without looking back. Man loved his dog, and the dog loved man. They were made for each other, and man couldn't have made a living without his dog. Man appeared to exercise a great control over the movements of his dog's bowels. Hat said, "That does really beat me. I can't make that one out." It all began in Miguel Street. One morning, several women got up to find that the clothes they had left to bleach overnight had been sullied by the droppings of a dog. No one wanted to use the sheets and the shirts after that, and when man called, everyone was willing to give him the dirty clothes. Man used to sell these clothes. Hat said, "Is things like this that make me wonder whether the man really mad." From Miguel Street man's activities spread, and all the people who had suffered from man's dog were anxious to get other people to suffer the same thing. We in Miguel Street became a little proud of him. I don't know what it was that caused man to turn good. Perhaps the death of his dog had something to do with it. The dog was run over by a car, and it gave, Hat said, just one short squeak, and then it was silent. Man wandered about for days, looking dazed and lost. He no longer wrote words on the pavement, no longer spoke to me or to any of the other boys in the street. He began talking to himself, clasping his hands and shaking as though he had ague. Then one day he said he had seen God after having a bath. This didn't surprise many of us. Seeing God was quite common in Port of Spain and, indeed, in Trinidad at that time. Ganesh Pundit, the mystic Master from Fuente Grove, had started it. He had seen God, too, and had published a little booklet called What God Told Me. Many rival mystics and not a few masters had announced the same thing, and I suppose it was natural that since God was in the area man should see him. Man began preaching at the corner of Miguel Street, under the awning of Mary's shop. He did this every Saturday night. He let his beard grow and he dressed in a long white robe. He got a Bible and other holy things and stood in the white light of an acetylene lamp and preached. He was an impressive preacher, and he preached in an odd way. He made women cry, and he made people like Hat really worried. He used to hold the Bible in his right hand and slap it with his left and say in his perfect English accent, "I have been talking to God these few days, and what he tell me about you people wasn't he really nice to hear. These days you hear all the politicians and them talking about making the island self-sufficient. You know what God tell me last night self, just after I finish eating God say, man, come and have a look at these people. He show me husband eating wife and wife eating husband. He show me father eating son and mother eating daughter. He show me brother eating sister and sister eating brother. That is what these politicians and them mean by saying that the island going to become self-sufficient. But, brethren, it not too late now to turn to God. I used to get nightmares every Saturday night after hearing man preach. But the odd thing was that the more he frightened people, the more they came to hear him preach. And when the collection was made, they gave him more than ever. In the weekdays he just walked about, in his white robe, and he begged for food. He said he had done what Jesus ordered and he had given away all his goods. With his long black beard and his bright deep eyes, you couldn't refuse him anything. He noticed me no longer, and never asked me, "So you goes to school?" The people in Miguel didn't know what to make of the change. They tried to comfort themselves by saying that man was really mad, but, like me, I think they weren't sure that man wasn't really right. What happened afterwards wasn't really unexpected. Man announced that he was a new Messiah. Had said one day, "You auntie hear the latest?" We said, "What is about man?" He say he going to be crucified one of these days. Nobody go touch him, Edward said. Everybody afraid of him now. Had explained. No, it auntie that. He going to crucify himself. One of these Fridays he going to Blue Basin and tie himself to a cross and let people stone him. Somebody Errol, I think laughed, but finding that no one laughed with him, fell silent again. But on top of our wonder and worry, we had this great pride in knowing that man came from Miguel Street. Little handwritten notices began appearing in the shops and cafes and on the gates of some houses, announcing man's forthcoming crucifixion. They going to have a big crowd in Blue Basin, had announced, and added with pride, and I hear they sending some police, too. That day, early in the morning, before the shops opened and the trolley buses began running in Areopita Avenue, the big crowd assembled at the corner of Miguel Street. There were lots of men dressed in black and even more women dressed in white. They were singing hymns. There were also about 20 policemen, but they were not singing hymns. When man appeared, looking very thin and very holy, women cried and rushed to touch his gown. The police stood by, prepared to handle anything. A van came with a great wooden cross. Hat, looking unhappy in his serge suit, said, "They tell me it make from matchwood. It anti-heavy. It light." Edward said, in a snapping sort of way, "That matter is the heart and the spirit that matter." Hat said, "I anti saying nothing." Some men began taking the cross from the van to give it to man, but he stopped them. His English accent sounded impressive in the early morning. "Not here. Leave it for Blue Basin." Hat was disappointed. We walked to Blue Basin, the waterfall in the mountains to the northwest of Port of Spain, and we got there in 2 hours. Man began carrying the cross from the road, up the rocky path and then down to the basin. Some men put up the cross, and tied man to it. Man said, "Stone me, brethren." The women wept and flung bits of sand and gravel at his feet. Man groaned and said, "Father, forgive them. They know what they doing." Then he screamed out, "Stone me, brethren." A pebble the size of an egg struck him on the chest. Man cried, "Stone, stone, "Stone me, brethren. I forgive you." Edward said, "The man really brave." People began flinging really big stones at Man, aiming at his face and chest. Man looked hurt and surprised. He shouted, "What the hell is this? What the hell you people think you doing? Look, get me down from this thing quick, let me down quick, and I go settle with that son of a bitch who pelt a stone at me." From where Edward and Hat and the rest of us stood, it sounded like a cry of agony. A bigger stone struck Man. The women flung the sand and gravel at him. We heard Man's shout, clear and loud, "Cut this stupidness out! Cut it out, I tell you! I finish with this arseness, you hear?" And then he began cursing so loudly and coarsely that the people stopped in surprise. The police took away Man. The authorities kept him for observation. Then for good.